Hello there, folks. All good online? Okay. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you all here for our Princeville Moʻolelo series, which is a partnership, of course, between the Friends of Kauai Wildlife Refuge and our good friends here at the Princeville at Hanalei Community Association. Welcome to you in the room. Great to see your beautiful faces. Welcome to you folks online. I'll give you just one minor notice, folks on Zoom. We do apologize. We're having internet issues in the room here today. We feel really confident about what we're going to be able to offer you, but if it starts to act up, we do apologize. Patty is working the Zoom room for you, folks online. If you have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat, and she'll bring your questions into the room. And just super quick, hello from us as the Friends Group. We are honored, as I said, to partner with the association to once a month bring us together as a community to hear all of these great voices we have around the island and beyond, talking about conservation and Hawaiian cultural stories and history. So it's just our honor to produce this series and for you to participate and show up every month and be a part of it. So whether you're new to our group or a continued friend, everyone's welcome. Just my usual spiel. Just to always take the opportunity to let folks know who we are and why we're here. I've had the pleasure of leading this beautiful organization for about 5.5 years, but the Friends Group actually goes back 41 years. It was actually established at the very beginning when Kilauea Point was first established as the dedicated nonprofit Friends Group that helps bring support for our 3 national wildlife refuges, which of course are Hanalei and Kule'ia. Those are 2 refuges for threatened and endangered water birds, and Kilauea Point, of course, which is a refuge for our beautiful seabirds. So as a Friends Group, basically we help provide financial support and community outreach and staffing assistance to help support our beautiful friends in brown at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and their incredible programs and their services. So there are a few things we do with consistency as we bring those resources to the refuge. Really centered around protecting the wildlife and the spaces that they depend upon. In addition to that, drilling down into some programs where we help underwrite, for example, the cost of care for all of the sick and injured birds transferred from one of our refuges and into the incredible care of our partners at Save Our Shearwaters. We have a whole host of programs related to education. Certainly the conservation depends upon the next generation getting equally inspired and aware of the wildlife and the native plants and everything that we have going on with our mission. So we support the young ones through free bus trips out to Kilauea Point and a lot of financial resources to the youth outreach. And on the other end of the scale, something I'm really proud to share is that we also have an annual scholarship fund. And this year we're providing our largest distribution ever, $25,000 in scholarships. This year we're able to award to 14 young people that are pursuing careers in some type of conservation-based career. So they're going to go out with the support of our organization, get educated about different wildlife conservation issues, come back to our island, and the impact is immeasurable. So we're really, really proud of that investment in the future. Really proud as a Friends Group. Like I said, our largest distribution ever. Thanks really to the generosity of our community and folks like you that are making that possible. So super excited about that. I hope you're inspired by the work that we're doing. If you're not already receiving it, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. We would love to have you join our monthly newsletter. It's a really great place to learn about the work that we're doing, the work that Fish and Wildlife is doing, volunteer opportunities that come up, and all kinds of good stuff. But visit us at Kilauea Point, shop out at the nature store. All of the proceeds of our nature store get fed right back into programs and services of our 3 refuges. We help support the volunteer program of Fish and Wildlife. So like I said, our newsletter is a great place to learn about upcoming opportunities. And of course, joining us as a member or a friend. So we are a conduit of all your love and generosity flowing to Fish and Wildlife. And we're just honored to be in the role as a Friends Group. As we continue this series, just a heads up of some of the next voices in the series. In August, our friends at Save Our Shearwaters will be back. That's just before the annual fallout season. So a lot of great information about what they do and how they help. That'll be on August 20th, right here in this space. September, we're still working on. And then a really special opportunity for us. If you've been in our nature store, you know there's a lot of beautiful artwork by our dear friend Karen Lobel-Fried. She's an amazing artist and a passionate conservationist herself, and she has a brand new book that she's producing, Finding Home: A Hawaiian Petrel's Journey. And the story around Hawaiian petrels is very central to the mission of Kilauea Point. And so we are going to put together a presentation that from her talking about this incredible, beautiful new book that she's producing, and also bringing some of the conservationists into the presentation who have been working to help preserve and bring petrels to Kilauea Point. So that's going to be a really fun one, October 15th. And then in November on the 19th, our good friends at Conservation Dogs of Hawaii are going to come in and talk about the multitude of programs and how we partner with them and help support them in their work. Kim Rogers is here with us today. She was one of the founding members of that initiative. Mahalo for that. But it really, their work just continues to grow in terms of the different types of species and efforts that that partnership between the trainers and the dogs is able to do, the efficacy of what they can do. It's just amazing, and you're in for a treat. So put that one on your calendar. So that's our glimpse into the future. However, today we get to talk plants with two amazing gentlemen. We have with us Brendan Stogner, all right, and Ezikio Quintana. Oh, I knew I was going to butcher one of those. My apologies. These gentlemen are horticulturists and plant lovers from Kauai with over a decade of experience in the field between them. They currently work at Limahuli Garden and Preserve, where they have the privilege of protecting and sharing the plants of Hawaii. And we are in for an incredible treat as they demonstrate and talk through the expertise of that incredible partner and your experience. We're just really honored to have you here today. Mahalo. And I will pass this to one of you. One of you gets this mic.
Perfect.
Thank you. Well, hello.
Right on. All of you guys.
You gotta do your top button.
That's right.
So aloha. My name is Ezikio.
My name is Brendan Stogner.
We grow plants for a living and for fun. We're gonna talk about the propagation and care of native Hawaiian plants, some background information on that. It's going to be pretty casual. We have a series of slides just to go over some background information, and then we'll get into some of the specifics. We'll give a demonstration on some of the horticultural techniques that we use, and have everybody get a chance to kind of see the step-by-step process from germination to final plant ready to outplant. So to get started, we've kind of got some backgrounds already, but I'm a horticulturalist at Limahuli Garden and a co-founder and owner of Ulupanu Nursery. That doesn't mean much yet. It started like a month ago. So I have about 9 years of conservation and field botany experience with some agricultural experience thrown in there as well. 6 years of horticultural experience. And my favorite plant is Ie or Freycinetia arborea. Big fan. I have a tattoo of the flower on my hand.
And me, Brendan Stogner, again, also a horticulturalist at Limahuli Gardens, where we are so blessed and privileged to spend almost every day of our lives. 6 years of professional horticulture experience between a bunch of different amazing organizations and companies. 3 years of professional field botany experience with Limahuli. My favorite plant is Olona, the Tetrardia latifolia, which me and Zico have the privilege of working with a lot, and especially with our jobs at Limahuli.
Brendan's tattoo is a little more hidden.
Yeah.
So basics. Plant anatomy. You don't necessarily need to understand this in order to successfully grow plants. Plants like to grow. It's their whole thing. But most of these terms most people are familiar with, but there are specific applications of them for botany, which extends to horticulture. We talk about botany, that's the science of plants, studying of plants. Horticulture is the science and art of growing those plants. This is just to kind of give an overview of the things that we look at when we're identifying plants, which is important when it comes to growing plants, because you want to make sure that you know what you're growing, especially when we start to talk about what native Hawaiian plants are and making sure that we're growing the right things for the right place. Yeah, we're not going to get into this into any detail.
Yeah.
If you're interested in this more, we can talk about it after the fact. This is just some more information. When we look at plants, we pay attention to every visible aspect that we can, but also smell, taste, sound. All of those things do end up becoming important. Texture is a big one as well. These are just some of the characteristics that we look at when we're identifying plants and getting to know them. This is also important when we start to think about plant care later on. If you're used to seeing a particular leaf shape or flower morphology on a plant that you're very familiar with, and suddenly that starts to change, that can indicate things that are going wrong, environmental changes, diseases, pests. So just something to keep in mind.
To keep in mind that anatomy, that will kind of play into how we categorize these plants in taxonomy, how we label these plants, how we group them together, how we find out how they relate to each other. And that's kind of this on the screen is pretty much the
general gist.
Yeah,
just the grand overview.
The grand overview of how we classify everything in life, everything that's living through domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and subspecies. Sometimes getting into even more weeds along with that. But we focus on mostly these 4/3 of this when we look at plants, especially in a horticultural context, and how they relate to each other. And that's part of the fun of learning about plants, and especially native Hawaiian ones, is seeing what families they belong to, what plants that we know outside of Hawaii that the plants relate to. And it's just a good way to get really familiar with the plants.
And there's insights to be had from the relationships between plants. So if you know that, like hibiscus, it's in the mallow family, Malvaceae, and things that affect plants. So say there's a hibiscus that's been in the horticultural industry for a super long time. It has known pests. It's in the hibiscus family. And so there's known treatments and managements for that pest. And then you try to bring something else into horticulture. You might gain insight on how to grow that particular plant if it's in the same family. It might have the same problems. It might have the same benefits. So understanding those relationships between plants and plant groups is really important. It also gets really fun when you start to think about hybridization. Some people are really into ornamentals, and crossing plants can be really great. We don't do it in our professional context because we're a conservation garden, and we're pretty dedicated to maintaining the genetic integrity of Hawaiian plants. But I'm not going to tell people not to do that. So that's another thing to consider, and also to avoid if you're trying to avoid hybridization between things that you don't want to hybridize, for sure. Diversity, diversity, diversity. That's the name of the game in Hawaii. We have, what, 1,400?
1,400 species all throughout Hawaii, or plant species specifically. And they're all incredibly beautiful, incredibly unique. 90% of them are endemic, and we'll get more into that later.
But the reason they're so diverse is because our environments are diverse. So this is Nu'ololokai on Kauai. This is coastal strand as well as coastal dry forest that rapidly becomes more upland dry forest that rapidly becomes wetland forest. But in less than a mile, you have at least 2 or 3 different ecosystem types.
This is our beautiful valley that we get to work in every day, Limahuli Valley. We consider this kind of a mesic to wet forest system. Unfortunately, a lot of it is invasive plant dominated these days, but we do have an abundance of really beautiful, incredibly unique plants as well that are native.
Here we have a cloud forest on Oahu, one of the more diverse ecosystems in Hawaii.
And beautiful alpine regions at the top of Haleakala. It's just crazy to think how many different ecosystem types we have in such small areas in these islands, and that's definitely part of why we have such incredible plant life.
Cassie Jensen, do you have a question? We'll get into that in great detail when we talk about place, appropriateness of place. But generally speaking, well, it's coastal, right, in our proximity to the ocean, but we also have pretty close proximity to the more montane region east of here, south of here. So you kind of get an interesting blend of stuff. We have high elevation refugia right now that can kind of indicate what used to grow here. So probably ohia dominated with, like everywhere in Hawaii, with some of our more common trees in the Rubiaceae and Malvaceae, but probably some are Mesic. Yeah.
And my parents can attest to this in the backyard of our home that is filled with native plants. Most of them do very well in Princeville. It's a great place to grow native plants.
So when we're talking about Hawaiian plants, what are we talking about?
So plants of Hawaii, we categorize them mostly in two categories with four main subcategories. Those categories are native and non-native. So our native plants are plants that got here on their own. And when I say they got here on their own, I mean that in three ways. We call them the three W's when we're learning them in school. They're by wind, wing, or wave. So by birds, the ocean, or the airstreams that are above us. When they come to Hawaii, they get here and can be classified as either indigenous or endemic. When they're classified as indigenous, that means they are here, but they are also elsewhere outside of Hawaii. So they're found either all throughout Polynesia, all throughout the world, depending on the plant. That's just what we mean by indigenous. They're found here in other places.
Elaborate on that just a little bit. The reason something is indigenous doesn't always necessarily mean it's like a more recent arrival.
Right.
It might mean that it's really genetically stable, or it might mean that it has a constant influx of new genetic material that keeps it true to its cosmopolitan range.
Right. This is outside of human globalization, I guess, in that way.
It maintains itself.
Yeah.
It's much more complicated than I just made it, but that's my understanding of it.
Totally,
so
totally.
so that's what I can impart to you today.
Yeah. Most of our plants here in Hawaii that are native are classified as endemic. That means that plant got over here on its own and changed genetically and incredibly, becoming its own unique thing that is only found in Hawaii. When something can be endemic, it doesn't necessarily have to be endemic to just Hawaii. It can be endemic to, like, say, Polynesia. It can be endemic to specific parts of Hawaii. It can be endemic to specific parts of Kauai, even. So there are plants here on Kauai that are endemic to very remote areas, like Ezikio just pointed to that hibiscus waimea, endemic to usually northwestern Kauai, which and only found there. And who knows what its natural range was like once upon a time, but at least that's what we can classify now. And like I said, 90% of our plants are classified as that endemic out of that 1,400 list. When we refer to non-native plants, we refer to either canoe species or post-Western contact introduced species. Those canoe species are the species that Polynesians brought with them by canoe. That list of 26 or so incredible plants that made that really cool botanical Swiss Army knife that you could pretty much solve any situation you're in with those plants and keep life sustained for thousands and thousands of years. Those post-contact introduced plants, that's the things that everybody else brought over with them when they came to Hawaii. And not necessarily all those are incredibly invasive, but a lot of them are.
If we're being real.
Yeah.
It's a direct pipeline from introduced to invasive.
Yes, yes.
I can see many of the plants that I think about when I think about like plants of Hawaii that are not native from where we're standing right now. We have photos of some of them in this presentation, but Birds of Paradise, not a native Hawaiian plant. Plumeria, not a native Hawaiian plant. Monstera, I can see it from here, not a native Hawaiian plant, and is in fact invasive. And ornamental hibiscus, which we can see just outside the window here. Ornamental, not usually invasive, occasionally in my yard. They can be invasive, but for the most part, they're just an intrusion. So what are native Hawaiian plants? Hibiscuses, so don't worry. If you want hibiscus in your yard, there are an abundance of options that are appropriate to this place, that fulfill their ecological niche and that are, in my opinion, much more beautiful. This is a hibiscus St. Johnianus, or Kokio ula ula, orange hibiscus. We have some of those seedlings here.
A lot smaller than this one.
Ilima, which many people are probably familiar with. If you're familiar with some of the stories of Oahu, or if you're a lei maker, this is a very popular lei plant. Also a hibiscus relative. Hibiscus waimea. Subspecies Hanarai. So when we talk about endemic and we talk about a really narrow range sometimes, this is a hibiscus waimea, which we have growing along the hedge line that Mike helped install over there. But this is a subspecies of that taxa that has a smaller flower and is only found in Limahuli Valley and Hanakapiai Valley, as far as we know right now. Very beautiful. We have Akia, endemic Wickstromia. We have Hoava, endemic as well. We have Hinahina, indigenous back there. This is just a photo of some of the key plants that we use in our horticultural practices. Wickstromia uvarusi, Akia is one that you probably see in landscaping pretty often, all around Kauai and all around Hawaii. They're very beautiful. Their flowers do not smell very good.
No.
But a great starter plant for people getting into growing plants because they grow really readily from seed and pretty easily from cutting as well.
And you got to get really up in there to smell them. So
Sometimes.
it doesn't, yeah. Depends.
Sometimes. Some depends on how much you have grown.
Yeah.
We do have native plumeria. This
Yeah.
is Hao, H-A-O, not H-A-U, or Rauwolfia sandwichense, or is, yeah.
Yeah.
And it smells like plumeria, but you got to get all.
Yeah.
This is Hinahina, which I mentioned in the previous photo of the Akia. This is an indigenous plant. It's an artemisia, so related to wormwood. Excellent accent plant in landscaping.
So good.
So beautiful. But a plant that was probably really abundant at one point. It's not currently endangered, but is pretty much relegated to cliff habitats along coastal areas or deep canyons, just because of habitat loss. Habitat loss. And everybody's favorite, mamaki, our stingless nettle, love of my life. So this is a really good example of how plants change when they arrive in island ecosystems. On Kauai, we have a really high nettle diversity. Mamaki is one that most people know about. Olona is another one that we mentioned earlier. Nettles, most people are aware, are stinging in many parts of the world, but in Hawaii, due to a lack of herbivory or large animals that consume plants, they didn't need to keep those defenses around. And so they didn't expend that energy over time in investing in that defense. So they became stingless and became actually very delicious. I like to eat them raw.
Yeah.
Most people don't.
Yeah. We walk around the garden like we're massive herbivores sometimes.
Yeah, it's fine. We make tea all the time.
All the
yes.
time,
We just
yeah.
had a mamaki go down in the garden. We harvested it today, and we're gonna make little goodie bags for people for a festival we have coming up. You can also fry them up as really tasty chips. So besides making tasty chips, why do you want to grow Hawaiian plants?
Yeah, so they're incredibly ecologically important for a multitude of different reasons, but they are first appropriate to place. So what was here before all these lawns were here, before all these other trees that you see around here, the big cook pines, it was all native forests here on all of Kauai, but in Princeville too. But you know, nowadays we go through all these houses and see things that we associate with Hawaii, but aren't actually from here. So it's really important just to keep, I think, the spirit of Hawaii alive by planting these plants in here, just because most people don't even know like what it looks like to be like Hawaii. Their habitat, it keeps native habitats alive. There are a multitude of different native insects, native lichens, native mosses, native ferns, native birds that all intertwine in this beautiful web of plants, and not one can survive really without the other because they've been evolving for millions of years together. So when we keep those plants alive, we keep everything else alive with it, or we give it the opportunity to. And of course, their environmental function can't be understated. We have, I think, a lot of problems in Hawaii as far as very quick erosion, massive landslides that are a massive problem for infrastructure kind of all over the island, wildfires. And a lot of those problems can be answered through restoration and native plant use and just keeping things together and keeping things more moist or dry. There's a multitude of different ways native plants can help with how an environment functions, but those are just a couple, just to name a few.
Also culturally significant. So we can't have a conversation about Hawaiian plants without Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian people. The stories and histories that are associated with these plants are tied up in their names, are tied up in their forms. A lot comes to mind when I think about Hawaiian plants. It's not just, you know, the pretty flower, the smell, their ecological function. Those are all things that are important to me, but so much of who our identity is here is actually linked to these plants. And the more you get to know these plants, the more you realize how little you know about everything else. And so the journey of learning about plants is also really a journey of figuring out our place in this place. Practices associated with these plants is really important. So we talked about canoe plants a little bit, but this landscape was shaped by the people that arrived, but the people that arrived were also shaped by the plants. So things like olona, endemic to Hawaii, not found anywhere else in the world, but Hawaiian craft and Hawaiian people created and continue to create one of the strongest natural fibers in the world out of this plant. That's a plant that doesn't exist anywhere else, and that practice and that cordage wouldn't have been created anywhere else in the world. So we can talk about wood used for various house structures, for crafts like valke, for making weaving hala. The list goes on and on and on and on about the cultural practices that are associated with these plants. And as these plants decline, so too do those practices. And humans are adaptable. You know, we find other materials to use, but at the end of the day, these materials aren't gone yet. These plants aren't gone yet. And so we should really be doing our best to make sure that they don't be gone. And then kinship. For those of you familiar with Hawaiian cosmogony, we as people in this world, but specifically Kanaka Maoli, are directly related to these plants. Hawaiian people are the younger sibling in certain stories of all of these plants. And so there's a lineal, a kinship responsibility to those plants to take care of them. So those of us that are not Hawaiian can really help that out and grow them as well. Oh yeah, also they're pretty.
They're so pretty. They're so pretty.
That's an ie.
Yeah.
That's like this big, the flower. Ie.
Yeah.
Personetia arborea.
Good place to see it as you're hiking along Napali coast to Hanakapiai. They flower all throughout the year, but definitely
kind
in
of season
summertime.
right now. Yeah. They've been going off lately.
Yeah.
They're also at Limahuli Garden.
Yeah.
Check us out.
Come on by.
And on my hand.
Yes. And just some beautiful photos. Other incredible native species that can be grown and are absolutely gorgeous. Look at that.
Come on.
Even more. This one's called Uhi Uhi. Along with what Ezikio was talking about earlier on connections to plants and why they're culturally significant, this wood specifically was one of the strongest woods in Hawaii. And now there are close to none of them left in the wild. A lot of them are only alive in cultivation. And when I say a lot of them, not much.
That's like nearly none.
Yeah. But they're absolutely gorgeous and they have a lot of really good landscape potential. And yeah, it'd be really cool to see more in people's backyards one day. And of course, my beloved Olona, Citrardi latifolia. That's the plant that Zico was talking about earlier that makes that really strong cordage, and the plant that we work with arguably the most in the garden.
And when we were talking about that leaf morphology thing earlier, when we were looking at the relationships between plants, this is a really close relative of mamaki, or really close relative of mamaki. But you can see that in even its leaf shape, coloration, margin. So you can kind of get hints on what plants are based on their morphology. A lot of people think that actually Hokiokeokeo is also related to mamaki, or they think that it is mamaki because they share some similar characteristics. Actually, there's ways to figure it out, but
yeah, we won't get it.
Yeah. How to grow then? What you guys came here for?
Many different ways.
Yeah.
Many different ways to grow.
There's 3 primary propagation methods. There's many other methods for changing plants. Grafting is its whole other thing, but we're really just going to focus on seeds, cuttings, and air layers. Seeds are the seeds. Most people generally understand that pretty well, but there's some strange fruit that have strange seeds out there. So when you think of hala, that's an infructescence, that's one big fruit. And all of those little tiny pieces that fall out, each of those is its own kind of fruit, but is also a seed.
Yeah, I guess the main ones that we generally work with can revolve into a couple different categories of being like a wet fruit or a dry fruit. Our more wet fruits can have like flesh in them. When you think of most fruits we eat, that's like a fleshy fruit. Depending on what kind it is, it either has sometimes a big seed right in the middle or like a million tiny little seeds. And each come with their own complications and fun things to learn when you're growing them. And the dry seeds, when you think of something like ohia lehua, a dry capsule with a bunch of tiny little seeds in that one too, but kind of different.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Back. And then cuttings. Cuttings is a really great way of getting a lot of plant material pretty quickly. It can also be a really easy way of growing plants if you have the right setup, the right patience. Some plants do really, really well from cutting. Things like pohuehue, a lot of vines will do really well from cutting because they spend their time jumping along the ground, rerooting themselves along their length. Things like pohinihina, pohuehue, akulikuli, the list goes on and on and on. Vines can pretty much just stick in the ground and they'll grow.
Yeah.
Some are not so easy, but we're going to get into some of the specific practices of that. But cuttings is a method of propagation that we use really often.
And if I could expand on that just a little bit as well, especially when it comes to cultivars and like varieties, that's where cuttings also gets really important. If you want to keep something like genetically the same, a cutting is a clone. So a lot of Hawaiian plants and a lot of the plants that Hawaiians brought with them on their canoes, they're almost all a form of cutting material, whether it's like huli for kalo or ava cuttings, all those. If you wanted a specific variety, that's how you keep that variety alive. And many of those varieties have been lost to time, but it's pretty incredible how many still even exist. Yeah, persist, those ancient varieties. So keeping a specific variety, if there's like a plant that's mutated in an interesting way that you see, and that's, if you want to keep that alive, that's how.
Yeah, there's people who collect all different colors of all different kinds of plants, things like ohia and hibiscus, and they do that through cuttings because you never really know what's going to come out at the end when you sow a seed, because pollen is really small and it can get everywhere. So unless you're really guarding that flower, doing hand pollination, and then preventing anything else from getting in, it's the genetic lottery. You never really know. And the third one is air layers.
A little less commonly known, but the same idea of cuttings, except cutting. You take a cutting, you put it in some media, and you pray for roots. An air layer, while it's still attached to the plant, you strip off that first layer, the first bark layer, and putting either rooting hormone or moss and wrapping that and holding it tight to the plant, keeping it moist. A plant, depending on the plant, will root right into that media that you put on, and you can just cut that after it's rooted. So it's a good way to get a pretty good sized plant in a short amount of time, and usually a lot more stable and healthier than a cutting will get you. So when we collect ulu in the garden or try and propagate breadfruit, that's a big one that we'll use air layers. So selecting certain types of varieties of trees, like a specific variety of lychee, that's super good. Air is a great way to do that as well.
Yeah, because you can air layer a branch pretty much as large as you want.
Yeah.
The chance of success varies with the size of the branch, but we can talk about that in more detail if anyone's interested. But for today, we're going to really focus on seeds and cuttings. And one question that comes up pretty quickly when people start thinking about growing plants is, where do you get material to grow plants? So sourcing propagation material ethically, sustainably, and legally. There's pretty much three things that we consider: protocol, friends, and permits. So protocol is the things that you do, the way that you conduct yourself when you are gathering materials. So if you have permit or permission to collect material, you still don't go and take it all. You take just what you need and you leave what is needed for other people and for the environment to regenerate. Friends, the best place to get plant material is from people who are already growing it, because that is, hopefully, if you have good friends, a sustainable source. They're growing their own plants, they're collecting and saving their own seed, and they're sharing it out. And then the last thing is permits. So if there's something that you are not able to get from your friends, go about it in the appropriate way. Permits is permission if it's on private property. Permits are an actual form you have to fill out online if it's on state property. I don't know what the feds do, but you can talk to the feds about that. Yeah, and then there's actually a subcategory of this with the friends, which is you can buy them. Nurseries sell it. I would be cautious about where you buy from. Most places have pretty good practices. Some that don't, but there's always organizations like NTPG that do plant sales that are fundraisers, and it's a really great way of getting a hold of plants. There's people within NTPG that are constantly giving plants away as well. People like Mike have abundant gardens and are more than happy to share seed and cuttings and stuff. So yeah, that's the gist of that. We can get into, again, more detail if you guys are interested, but Please, 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 let's not make growing Hawaiian plants a problem
Yes.
for our forests. Let's make it a way to supplement our forests.
Absolutely.
Methods, materials, care, and challenges. So this is as far as me and Brennan got with the presentation.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna hang out on this slide for a while. There's a lot more to talk about,
For sure.
but
You want to hold anything?
I think now's a good time
Yeah,
to open it up for questions for a second. We'll take a few, and then we're gonna get into some hands-on demonstrations. And then we'll talk more about plant care, the specifics of how you might want to set up a nursery or your sort of growing station, pests, and yeah, we'll talk about watering in pretty good detail as well.
If you have any growing questions, you can probably hold on to that, and you might see it, or if you don't, we'll hold another round of questions.
Techniques will be demonstrated, but
Yeah,
any other questions about the ecology, history, logistics, anything like that, please ask questions.
We love questions. That's a
Great
great
question.
question. So a lot of the fruit trees that you see around Hawaii, especially ones associated like pineapples or mangoes, papaya, none of those are from here. All of those are usually either from South America or Southeast Asia, other areas of the tropics. We don't have a lot of native large fruits. Our biggest, probably edible fruit.
Wait,
That's
no spoilers.
oh.
Were you gonna do a canoe plant?
No,
Okay,
no,
okay,
no.
Okay, I want to do a little pop.
You got it. Okay, sweet. No, good. Thanks for catching me. It's probably a native raspberry that we have here called akala, and it's pretty hard to find unless you're deep into the mountains on Kauai. Big Island, they're a little more abundant, but there's some that are like the size of the palm of your hand, and we're
They're
tempted to come
super
into
good.
like the raspberry trade, but some people think they're a little too tart. If you like tart berries, they're the ones, but
They're super.
yeah.
Does anyone know? So there's one fruit tree that's going off right now. It's a canoe plant. Does anyone know what it is? It's the only like charismatic fruit plant that we have. It is
Known for summertime.
It is a canoe plant.
A canoe plant. So
Mountain
apple.
Ohia'ai.
Yeah.
And so the Hawaiian name Ohia'ai indicates a relationship to the Ohia lehua. And if you've ever seen the flowers, they're quite similar. It's that little pom-pom. And that's a classic morphology of Myrtaceae, or the myrtle family, that also has eucalyptus, guava, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it's
Right.
edible.
Yeah.
Ohia.
Another great part and another really important thing that Cassie brings up, that Zico briefly touched on, is when we keep these plants in our yards, if we know them well enough, hopefully we learn their names. When we keep those names alive, that's just another part of Hawaiian language we keep alive, and another piece of knowledge that we keep alive for ourselves. So just more than just keeping the plants alive themselves, we're keeping everything that goes into these plants alive with them. So there's a lot more, I think, at stake rather than just a beautiful plant. There's a whole being, a meaning behind it.
And we talked about taxonomy, capital T taxonomy, but there is a whole system of Hawaiian taxonomy that requires a little more understanding of Hawaiian language to a degree, and a greater familiarity with the plants to get started in. But we mentioned the like capital T taxonomy because when you start to get into like growing guides and things like that, that's the nomenclature they're going to use.
Most language you'll see.
Yeah. So, question. We'll talk about soil a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we talk about outplanting, that's going to be a major point of discussion.
Yes.
But to briefly touch on it, most soil in most places that people are living in Hawaii is really poor because of our land use history.
Yes.
So sugarcane, cattle. Cattle can be really good for soil, but sugarcane is terrible for soil.
Absolutely.
So a lot of times people will outplant and they'll be like, my plants are dying. And it's, well, you're planting into soil that was tilled and pesticided and herbicided relentlessly for like 150.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that in more detail. But
And you guys have seen like all the crazy albizia trees that are everywhere. A big part of why they're so successful is because of that depleted soil. A lot of fabaceae trees like albizia, especially non-native ones that grow more aggressively, they love that depleted soil and will shoot like nitrogen into there, which will help other invasive plants like guinea grass that grows usually right underneath it and make just an awful, awful problem. Kim can tell you all about it. All those guys.
Kisk in the house. Yes.
What's the best way to rid of?
Oh,
Oh, it's a great question.
I think your son's working on a native plant restoration project in your yard. If I'm not mistaken.
The basic stuff out. Well, right. The Chiffonnier, yeah. A great
Well,
question.
Yeah, it's kind of a question you have to ask yourself and ask of your environment.
Yeah.
So if you live near bodies of water or you have strong winds, using herbicides becomes a different challenge. Generally, I advocate not using herbicide in the first place. But there are many instances where we're dealing with plants that are so challenging to remove. And all of us have day jobs, and we can't spend every single day out there cutting out every piece of root. We don't all have stump grinders. And things like octopus tree are unless you are like a decent arborist and have a backhoe, and African tulip, herbicide is a good option. We can talk about that more one-on-one, but yeah, blood, sweat, and tears is really the best way to get them out.
Yeah.
Because it's long-lasting. Yeah, you ever heard the phrase like salt the earth?
Yeah.
Yeah, it means
That's
nothing else will grow there.
Yeah.
So that is a
Yeah.
possible method in some areas, but generally speaking, not.
Though salt is, more, I guess, of a natural remedy, it doesn't really mean it's exactly better depending on what you
Depending on what your
options
worry
are.
is.
Yeah,
and
yeah, for sure.
Any other question? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, we have some websites that we'll send out links for. There's a couple of good books, but really the absolute best way to identify native plants is to talk to somebody who knows what they are. Just send pictures. Most of us are freaks, and we'll respond pretty much immediately and excitedly.
Get our numbers.
Yeah. Yes. It is good.
I have that book. That author is, he's done a great amount of work for growing native plants in people's yards.
There's like more plant freaks. The Stars are a conservation couple on Maui, and they have a website with just like so many photos of plants. And
David
you have-
Eichhoff, that's another really great one. A great website, Native Hawaiian Plants. His Instagram page.
Yeah. But that's why we emphasize that taxonomy thing in the beginning, because once you get a sense of the general plant families and you pay attention to those relationships, it becomes a lot easier to identify things later on. Yeah. So get a good foundation, a good understanding of the basic shapes of plants, of flowers, or other traits, and it'll make it way easier down the road. Totally. Yes.
Has anyone come up with
Yeah, totally. Plant identifier apps. I don't know if there's any specific native Hawaiian plants app for plant identification. That's the thing with kind of the AI identifiers. Even just on like a Apple camera roll, sometimes they're incredibly accurate.
Yeah, you're like, how do you know that?
Wow. Like it'll sometimes be, just Cassie the other day identified a seedling, like very tiny, like